So I thought I'd record a slightly different introduction today. I'm actually at an airport, and I'm sitting here with my little daughter, and I thought it was quite fitting actually because the title of today's topic is You're Never Too Old to Learn Something New. And this little darling here is always learning something new. In today's podcast, you're going to hear from a gentleman who is slightly older, well and truly into his 70s, and he's just taking up an apprenticeship as such, or a traineeship. It's a truly inspirational story of someone who really just wants to keep learning and keep following his passions. So enjoy the podcast. I'm sure you'll love it. This one's not actually a visual podcast, a video podcast. It's actually just audio. However, I'm sure you'll love it anyway. It's a great story. So that's all from me, and that's all from little Neve. Say goodbye. Say goodbye. And enjoy the show. See ya. Today's podcast has been proudly brought to you by Tradie Web Guys. Tradie Web Guys work with tradespeople only on their websites and marketing solutions to help them stand out from their competition. Everything from web design through to SEO, search engine marketing, content creation, you name it, guys. It is a customized solution for trade-based organizations, and it's fantastic. Head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/apply, fill in the form, and let's have a conversation.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Site Shed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
David Griffith, welcome to the Site Shed podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm well, thank you.
So this is a refreshing change from the typical business-related topics that I tend to talk about on the podcast. I'm dying to dive into your story a little bit because your son and I have actually been friends for a long time, and
right.
And he posted on Facebook the other day how you've just started a new apprenticeship, and one of the big mess.
No, I wouldn't glorify the title apprenticeship, but trainee.
Trainee. Okay, cool. Regardless, it's quite an interesting, I suppose, segue for somebody who may typically be coming towards the end of their career life and looking at retirement, and you're going, hey, no, I want to learn more things and get back out there. So I think
Precisely.
Hats off to you. I think it's brilliant.
I'm retired. 15 years ago.
Right. Okay. Now, you're going to have to level with me, David. Was it a case of your wife just wanting you out of the house?
No, I've been getting out of the house even before retirement. I had my own business in appliances, white goods, washing machines, dryers, dishwashers, and finished up in 2004 and sold the business. But I've always had an interest in transport, so I was already a member of the Sydney Bus and Truck Museum and had a couple of double-deckers. And I have always wanted to be, since boyhood, ambition was be a marine engineer.
Wow. And
the family thought, no, it'd be better to go to university and do something sensible. So I did, but here I am, age 76, and I'm studying to be a marine engineer.
Amazing. Now,
but you've got to start as fireman.
Yes. So this is where it gets interesting. So, tell me a little bit about, I suppose, how this traineeship is structured and what's involved throughout the different stages.
Right. Well, it's I'm a member of Sydney Heritage Fleet, which has its workshops in Roselle Bay and owns 3 steam ships, Lady Hopeton, a steam launch, Waratah, a steam tug, and in restoration is John Oxley, a steam pilot ship from Brisbane. And they need crew because these ships operate all the time. So the crew consists of skipper, engineer, fireman, and deckhands.
Right.
And I was always interested in steam, And the fleet has a very comprehensive training system whereby there's a course in steam, boilers, feed pumps, all the stuff that is necessary to make a boiler work.
Right.
And then you move on to steam engines and all the variations. But just to my great surprise, stoking a boiler is a lot more than just shoveling coal in. I'm quite
Really?
surprised to find, yes.
Okay.
I did a training day on Lady Hopeton, and it has a boiler that's very responsive to changes. It can get up steam in 2 hours, whereas Waratah takes a day.
What?
And, well, yeah, you've got to get this huge volume, hundreds of gallons of water boiling.
Wow.
Whereas Lady Hopeton has a much more efficient, quick water tube boiler. The water goes through tubes instead of just filling a space.
Right.
And you've got to be aware of the pressure available all the time. You've got to keep pressure up.
Yeah.
But when you come to a wharf or need to slow down, you have to keep the pressure down. Otherwise, the fire keeps burning hard and building up pressure, and it can reach a dangerous level. And there is a joke at the fleet that if the pressure builds up to the point where the safety valve blows off, you have to buy the rest of the crew a box of beer.
Well, let's hope it's the safety valve that blows off anyway. I know from my plumbing apprenticeships, we used to do a lot of we did a like a module or so on steam, and it can be quite a dangerous.
It's a terrifying terrifying element, that's for sure. A good blast of steam straight onto your body.
Take your hand off.
Takes your skin off.
Yeah.
Boils your blood.
Yeah.
And
infection.
There's not much of you left.
So I'm curious, when you, excuse my ignorance here, and I imagine there's a lot of the listeners out there that are thinking the same thing. They're like, wow, there's still steam-powered vehicles around. So are most of these, or all of these vehicles that you're working on, are they all sort of exhibition?
They're vessels, not
vessels.
Vehicles.
Sorry, vessels. I told you I was ignorant.
Small ships,
Okay.
boats, but generally vessels. No, steam vehicles are another thing. There are steam cars and so on. But no, they've got two fully operational all the time. You can just ring up and charter one of them or go on regular scheduled cruises.
Yeah, right.
And they were out over the June long weekend for the Transport Heritage weekend, and Lady Hopeton was giving trips from the National Maritime Museum.
Okay. And so are they more exhibition? Like they're not actually.
Oh no, they
okay.
work.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's not competition, but there is the National Maritime Museum, that huge thing in Darling Harbour near Pyrmont Bridge, and all its vessels are static.
Yeah, right.
They just sit. Whereas Sydney Heritage Fleet, all their vessels work.
So, as the engineer or the engineer in training, is it your job to maintain, preserve, keep it in the water?
Yes, operating and preserving. And preservation is a huge thing. The Lady Hopeton's going to come out of the water soon for what they call marine survey, which it has to do by law.
Okay.
And so pumps and fittings and hull and everything will be minutely inspected by an independent inspector, which costs thousands because it has to be drawn up out of the water. Because, as we said, steam is serious stuff, and you're carrying the public, so the vessel has to be well and truly, or if not seaworthy, certainly waterworthy.
Yeah.
And she's going to be out of action for a while, and I'm looking forward to getting into overhauling pumps and valves and all the hundreds of things. This vessel is just amazing. I couldn't have believed it, but in the engine room there are 5 steam engines.
Wow.
driving feed pumps. You have to have 2 feed pumps in case one fails.
Yeah.
A huge centrifugal pump driving or churning water out of the sea through a condenser and then back to the sea. The condenser cools the steam so that it can be reused.
Right.
And there's a bilge pump to get water out of the bottom of the ship.
Yeah.
And another engine driving a generator. On it goes. I forget them all.
Yeah, right. Yeah, amazing. And so in terms of, I mean, I don't want to get too technical because I genuinely have no idea when it comes to most engine-related things. But I mean, in terms of powering these steam vessels, I'm picturing in my mind, the guy in the overalls on the train shoveling coal into a furnace and locking it back.
Yes.
Is it a similar sort of scenario?
Very.
Okay.
Yes, the fireman on a locomotive has to do more than just shovel coal. He's got to watch boiler water level and adjust injectors to get the water level right. He's got to watch boiler pressure to make sure that 1, there's enough to get up the next hill, 2, that he's not wasting coal by letting the safety valve blow off all the time. Mm-hmm. And a great responsibility. If he ignores the warnings from the pressure gauge or the water level indicators, more than losing his job, he could lose his life.
Right.
And the driver then is responsible for speed and obeying signals, and generally speaking has a pretty easy life.
Right.
But huge responsibility.
So when we're going out on a vessel, taking a group out or whatever, is it like fuel where, okay, we need a certain amount of coal in order to get us from A to B?
Yes, very much so.
Right.
It's not exactly an efficient means. During the first day of my training, I was told that a quarter of the energy of the coal goes up the funnel to maintain a draft through the fire. Just to draw air through the fire, you use quarter of the heat in the coal.
Okay.
And then another huge amount is lost by radiation. The heat of the boiler, if you stand near the boiler, it's hot. Well, that's heat being lost.
Right.
And a little bit's left over for turning the engine over.
Right. And so the steam comes from, is the water being used, does it come from the ocean, or is it's not salt water?
No.
Oh, okay, yeah.
No, that was the case 200 years ago, but salt water just destroys a boiler.
Right.
The salt cakes itself onto the boiler tubes and insulates them, and so a lot of heat is lost, but the boiler tubes get hot and can simply blow up or deteriorate. So yes, the water has to be clean, and so they fill tanks with clean cold water, and then when the steam is exhausted from the engine, released from the engine after pushing the piston down, it goes into a condenser, and the condenser is cooled with salt water.
Yeah.
And the fresh water, just kept quite separate, cools down into water again from steam, and that sits in a tank they call the hot well, and then feed pumps pick that up and pass it back into the boiler. So theoretically there'd be no loss, but there is always some loss.
Yeah, of course.
So they have special tanks on board for the little bit of extra water that might be needed, but certainly you've got to have clean water, otherwise it destroys the boiler.
So tell me a little bit about, I suppose, your desire specifically to get into this at the age of 76. Apart from the fact you had a childhood dream of doing it, do your friends think you're nuts or what?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Do your friends think you're a bit crazy?
No, nobody has said, "Are you mad?" No, it seems to be great admiration all round. No, fascinating, and as I've discovered, a fairly steep learning curve.
Right.
But just the idea of keeping this thing, the sound of a steam engine churning is very impressive, and the sight of these massive connecting rods and crankshaft going round and up and down, it's very, very impressive to watch, because it's not enclosed like a car engine. The connecting rods and the crankshaft are all completely exposed, and if you were to get caught in there, you'd simply be turned into pulp.
Yeah, no kidding. And
quite exciting.
Yeah, who doesn't love pulp? I imagine there's quite a lot of. When you're talking about doing this, is it a traineeship? Did you say?
Not official, but within Sydney Heritage Fleet, yes. So when I emerged from the STEAM course and the engineers course, I'll be accredited to operate Sydney Heritage Fleet vessels within Sydney Harbour.
Okay.
But it's a sort of a concession, really, to the historic vessels, where if you're going to be a marine engineer on board cruise vessels or tankers or whatever, you have to have serious qualifications that are recognised worldwide. But this qualification will simply be recognised within Sydney Harbour.
And how long is the traineeship?
It's at your own speed, really. I've got assignments for the STEAM course, and I submit homework answers, question and answer, and diagrams and answers to questions, and they're marked and returned, and there's no actual schedule for it. In fact, the trainer is a very busy man. He's deeply involved with restoration of vessels, and he's a TAFE teacher, and his day job, he teaches design and technology.
Okay.
But more casual. He's not working all the time. He's a mature age now, but his knowledge is deeply impressive. So I'm learning from a master there.
And I imagine so with a traineeship like the one that you're doing. I mean, I know it's relevant for most, if not every trade. You know, what you learn on the job is often, you know, even more important than the theoretical element to the training.
Absolutely.
Program.
Yeah, so, that's what I discovered on my first day of firing.
Right. And so how is there like a certain amount of time that you have to work practically on the job before you can be certified?
Yes. I have to have fired, been a trainee fireman on both types of boiler, the water tube and the fire tube boiler. And I'm not sure how many times I have to complete that, but I will be assessed by my peers, I suppose. Other masters and engineers will say yay or nay. So, yeah, there's no sort of government certified set of rules, but the Heritage Fleet is not going to let you loose on one of their irreplaceable vessels without pretty strong evidence that you know what you're doing.
Right. And I imagine, even on that topic, of things being irreplaceable, do you find, or can you foresee as a future engineer that, some of the parts are no longer available?
You wouldn't believe how often I get this question.
Oh, right.
It was usually related to my previous passion, which was buses.
Right.
For many years, I've been a member of the Sydney Bus and Truck Museum, and I have 2 double-deckers that I've restored.
Wow. Do they live at home?
And no, they're at the Sydney Bus and Truck Museum in Leichhardt, not far from Heritage Fleet, oddly enough.
Oh, cool.
And always ask, where do you get the parts? Well, 3, you make them. They're sheet metal or folded or machined or cast And there's still the skills to do all that. If you want a gear, you can have it cast and then machined, and there are all the right heat treatments. Or a bearing, you buy that from Bearing Supply, or seals the same. Or you get timber from timber yards and paint from Bunnings, and rivets from the Rivet Man in Brookvale, and nuts and bolts, ditto.
Right.
Or if it's a really unique thing and you don't want to even try making one, you have to hope that there'll be another bus like it that can be cannibalised to supply parts.
Spare parts.
But if you wanted to rebuild the diesel engine of a double-decker, you could have pistons made, gudgeon pins, bushers,
right,
big end and crankshaft bearings. You could have all that made at expense, but it can be done, and it is done.
Right.
I saw the other day at the Heritage Fleet, there's this huge gearbox used for turning the steam engine over when it's at rest for adjustments and valve setting and so on. And it's a huge worm driving a bronze pinion, and the pinion was worn out, so they had a new one cast. And the machine shop at the workshops in Roselle machined it, and it's just a beautiful sight. This great bronze-coloured wheel with helical teeth, and just made in-house.
Yeah, right.
In fact, the head machinist says there's nothing we can't make.
Yeah, wow. And is that so? I mean, I know I've got some clients that are in the fabrication game, and they do a lot of things like, pan bending, laser cutting, and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
With the heritage vessels, do the parts that you need to replace, can they be made through modern methods, or do they still prefer to make them traditionally, like on a lathe or something like that?
Oh, you use whatever is available. For instance, the ship that's under restoration now, the John Oxley, the pilot steamer, that hull has been completely replated.
Wow.
Every plate. And there's complex curves, which they did by the use of heat and rolling. And I did read how it was done, but by hand. They didn't use sophisticated machinery because they haven't got it, but they've got some amazing stuff there. Huge radial drill, which is like a drill press, except you can swing the head around 180 degrees. And this thing can reach, I think it's 12 feet out from its centre. So you can have a plate that's 24 feet wide and position it on this thing and drill. And it looks as if it must weigh 20 tonnes minimum.
Yeah.
Enormous machine.
It certainly makes you respect the original builders, doesn't it, and the technology they would have had back then.
Yes, yes. I mean, these days there are hydraulic riveters that don't need heat. You just put the rivet in, squeeze it at hundreds of tons pressure, and it's set. But in the old days, you had to heat the rivet to white heat, get it in quickly before it melted, and then use a pneumatic hammer to bash it over at the end. That's how the Harbour Bridge was built.
Yeah, that's right. I've seen that. I know it's funny. It's a slight segue, but my cousin lives in the United Kingdom in a house that's maybe 500 years old, and they had issues with something behind the wall. One of the services heating off. I think it might have been something to do with the radiator, and I had to open up a section of the wall, and anyway the tradesman did what they had to do. Then they patched the wall back up, but the patch kept falling out. And they couldn't figure out why the patch kept falling out. So they ended up having to get this specialist come in, and because the builder just couldn't for the life of him figure it out. So they got this specialist to come in, and the specialist said the reason why the patch is falling out is because you're trying to cement render a wall that's been traditionally made from straw and horse manure. So to fix the hole in the wall, he basically had to make a mix of straw and manure.
And
Yeah, well, I suppose the old material attacked the new.
correct, and it was good as gold from then. But it's amazing because
Yeah.
I mean, you sometimes think, oh, technology is the answer to everything, when in reality, regression sometimes can be the key.
Oh, yes. Well, that applies with some of the pumps in the engine rooms of the vessels. The moving piston rod up and down is sealed by a gland, and the packing of the gland was originally asbestos.
Right.
Great stuff, but they can't use it now, so they're using Teflon.
Really?
Yeah. So where there's a will, there's a way. These guys at the Heritage Fleet are never going to stop these vessels working.
Wow.
Mind you, there's a lot of them my age.
So they might run out of coal before the vessels do, you reckon?
Well, there's enough young people around. For instance, there's an apprentice boilermaker who's probably in his 30s, mature age apprentice, and he's from Scotland, which is appropriate because half the machinery was built in Scotland.
Oh, wow.
And he's up on the hull of John Oxley, riveting, caulking, shaping panels. He's a superb welder, has all the skills that a boilermaker has.
Yeah.
But at the moment he's working on the hull of the vessel.
Amazing.
And there's a qualified tradesman with him, qualified boilermaker.
So, I'm just curious.
So that'd be interesting. That'd be interesting for you to interview him. He's a real apprentice.
Yeah, right.
Scottish, from Edinburgh, and doing an apprenticeship in something that his great-great-grandfather might have done.
Wow. That would be cool, yeah.
So many ships. Yeah.
You could get an intro to him, maybe.
Yeah. He's a real tradie.
And David, I'm just curious, like with all this and these projects, these builds, these repairs, they sound like a like even the smallest thing could take quite a long time and it could be very expensive. Who pays for it?
Well, the chartered hirings make quite a lot.
Okay.
There are some very generous donors who, I don't know if I can name one, but
no, that's all right.
the coal, for instance, comes from BHP Bulli.
Okay.
That's a donation.
There you go.
And J. Patrick and Sons, the stevedores, put in money. And there's another big donor who wishes to remain anonymous.
Okay.
So, yes, it does rely on other people's generosity, but very strong efforts made in marketing the voyages and retailing. I'm getting an online retailing operation up and running, selling marine-related books, merchandise, clothing, ship models, I hope, and stuff like that, which will make a little contribution to the funds. But yeah, money is a constant requirement, and they're lucky that the site at Roselle Bay is at a peppercorn rental, but the state government is obliged to spend a significant proportion on preservation of heritage.
Okay. And so they give you funding to a degree?
Not beyond, don't quote me here, I'm not certain, but beyond the actual site at Roselle Bay, right. I'm not sure what else.
Okay. So things like the mooring and the facility, they may have a certain hand in, but beyond that, it's sort of not really their problem, so to speak.
Well, yeah, there was a very happy tie-up with the National Maritime Museum, which is federal and in Darling Harbour. Okay. They allowed the Heritage Fleet the use of their wharf for the cruises that took place that long weekend recently when I started my apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And So that was a contribution. They didn't have to pay mooring fees to pull up at a wharf.
Right. Because I imagine with these sort of vessels as well, it's not like is it a traditional mooring, or is there, specific things that these steam-powered boats would require that a regular motor yacht might not?
No. Well, yes, if they were operating for days and weeks on end, yes, they would need access to coal supplies.
Right.
And fresh water, but no, they wouldn't need diesel fuel. They'd need a truckload of coal.
Right.
But apart from that, no, they could use cruise boats' moorings so long as the coal could be brought in.
Gotcha. Okay. And so, in terms of, I suppose, your journey down this path, being that your traineeship can take as little or as long as you effectively want, how long do you anticipate to be until you become an engineer?
Oh, engineer, a long way off.
Right.
There's going to have to be, I would say, at least a year of fireman, trainee fireman, and then to some extent there has to be a vacancy for an engineer, but being entirely voluntary, if a voyage is planned, volunteers are called upon to put their names down for a roster. So if there's 4 engineers available, one of them will put his hand up, but if there's 6 available, it means the others can have a longer break. So
anyway, in terms of your progression, what does that look like in the foreseeable future?
I haven't inquired that deeply.
Okay.
But I do anticipate spending many more months training as fireman before they. I mean, the ultimate would be allowed out on a cruise on my own as the fireman.
Right.
That would be a long time coming.
Okay.
Because the vessels are so precious.
Right.
But as it works out, there's usually a surplus of volunteers, and on the Monday last that I was training, there were 2 firemen in addition to me, so we were all able to take a bit of a break, but I was there the whole time because I was learning from 2 firemen. Yeah. And there are different approaches.
Of course.
Some advocate doing it this way and that way.
Yeah.
In fact, the guy who knows most about it pointed out to me the other day that you should regard the grate, that's the space where the fire burns, and it's about 5 feet square. It's big, and this is only a small launch. He advocated firing it in quarters, so divide the space into 4 areas and fire each one in succession.
Yeah, right.
But what you mustn't do is let the fire burn down in any area, because then all the air will rush through that space and leave the other areas of coal not burning as well. So we start to lose pressure.
Yeah, wow. Interesting. Tricks of the trade, eh?
I'll say, and I was told one of the things to watch, because you've got this grate, where the coal sits and air passes through it from underneath, and ash drops through the bars of the grate down into the ash pit. And if you look in the ash pit, if it's dark, you've got trouble, because that means that the spaces between the grate bars are blocked up with ash, so not much air is getting through.
Right.
So there's a process called raking and slicing, where you push the coal around so that the ash can drop through freely until you can see light in the ash pit.
Interesting.
So there's all these things that have to be done. Certainly not an easy life.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, look, it's been great to talk to you, David. I wish you all the best on your on your voyage.
Yeah. Give me a ring in a year or two when I'm a qualified fireman.
Oh no, I might just do that. Do a bit of a follow-up call. It's very interesting. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that like myself, would have absolutely no idea when it comes to what you're currently learning. So I think it's quite fascinating.
Well, you're talking to somebody who a year ago wouldn't have had a clue either.
Right.
I couldn't believe how much more there was to it than just shoveling coal.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I imagine over the years, I mean, if you were to go back in time 200 years and speak to somebody that was doing the same job, I wonder what the little differences would be in the space of things like, occupational hazards and.
You want occupational hazards? Join Sydney Maritime Fleet.
Yeah.
So, no, I shouldn't say that. There is a very strong focus on safety.
Oh, of course.
But you're dealing with dangerous materials and substances, so their safety is paramount. It's got to be watched all the time.
Well, mate, look after yourself. Keep safe. Look forward to checking in with you and seeing how the journey's going in a year or so.
Right.
And
thanks, Matt. Thanks for getting in touch.
No, absolutely. Good on you, mate. It's a great story.
I hope it inspires a few tradies to turn up at Roselle Bay, because we need machinists, boilermakers, welders, electricians, plumbers, yes. And it's at Wharf 4, James Craig Road, Roselle Bay.
Lovely.
The pay is terrible, i.e. zero, but the
rewards are outstanding.
The skills, the rewards are enormous. The skills that are displayed there are just, I'm in awe of.
Yeah.
And so you're an apprentice machinist. There's one guy there that could teach anybody everything, I think. He's just awesome in his skills.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's fantastic. We're going to wrap this episode up. Thank you again for your time. And
right.
I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Right. Thank you, man.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to thesiteshed.com, where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from this show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.